semi-pleasant to listen to. So, before I start, I want you to maybe pause this and try to think of all the planning laws and regulations that you think relate to preservation. Maybe you did the reading and you looked them up that way, and that's great too. But try to think of all of them and what they do, how they work. So give it a second, pause right now, and then when you're done, come back, and hopefully none of what I cover will be completely new to you. Let's hope. All right, so go ahead, and then when you get back, here we go. Hopefully you're back now. Hope it was a nice break, etc. We're going to go over all of these different laws and regulations and tools. All right, ready? So here we go. So let's start with the really obvious one, which is zoning. We'll come back to more details about zoning in a bit. Another one that should be relatively obvious is transfer of development rights, because that's part of zoning. Another one that's part of zoning is overlay zoning. Zoning. Then easements. Then let's see. Yeah, the big bad one, eminent domain. Then we've got section 106. Like this. Let's fix that. And I would also put NEPA and SEPA in the same bucket. We'll go back over that in a bit. Then we've got all the tax benefits, tax freezes, tax deferments, but also revolving funds, low interest loans. All right. Then we've got, let's see, section 4F. Is that it? I think that might be it. Yeah, I think that's just about it. All right, so these are your main tools that you're going to use in preservation planning. Now, of course, those tools can only be used in certain environments and in certain ways, and we'll come back to that in a bit. But fundamentally, they're your major tools. So what I want to do first is go over all of the tools and discuss what they do so that you remember how they work and, yeah, all that good stuff. So we're going to start with the easiest one, which is zoning. So you'll remember that zoning works under police power. Of course, it needs to obey the Constitution. Everything needs to obey the Constitution. But police power means that it's the power to enforce safety, security, welfare, and morals. And this tool is a tool that is used everywhere in the country, right? And the way that we mainly use it is through what's called Euclidean zoning, right, which tells us what you can build, the density of it, the size in general of it, what it looks like, etc., right? Now, the way that I think of this tool is that it is the Swiss Army knife of preservation planning. It does everything, okay? It slices, it dices, it's a floor wax. If you carry this tool around, you will be able to do almost anything that you want to do, which is great, except, okay, so it allows you to do almost anything you want to do, but that doesn't mean it does everything super duper well. Yes, you can do everything with it, but do you really want to cut down a tree with a Swiss Army knife? No, you do not. It's not exactly the right tool for the job. It's better than nothing. But, you're more likely to cut yourself than you are to cut down a tree. So you need to be careful with this tool because, yes, it's very useful, but it also has some downsides. For instance, there's the grandfather clause, which limits what you can and can't do with it, right? If it's already built, you can't do anything. It's kind of an imprecise tool, right? So if you want something to happen, that's all well and good, but zoning all by itself is not going to make it happen. It'll help if there's demand, right? But again, there needs to be demand, otherwise it's not gonna work. All right, so here's the Swiss Army knife. Good tool. You should have one. All right, so this tool's great. That is not at all what I wanted to do. Let's go back to this. So that's a good tool, but fundamentally it's not the best tool for preservation, at least not all on its own. But there are kind of variations on zoning that allow for really good preservation planning. One of them is transfer of development rights, or air rights, which we've talked about before in 209. So transfer of development rights allows you to move the development pressure from the property in question, the historic property, to a nearby property. So in a city, it allows the building to get taller next door, and then reduces the tax burden on the existing small building. In rural areas, it allows you to put the development growth on a nearby property and keep an area that's rural. And so this is a great tool. The thing is, it only works in either very urban areas or very rural areas. In other places, transfer of development rights doesn't really make sense. And so as a result, it doesn't make financial sense. So as a result, you're not going to use it. So the way that I like to think of this tool is, it's a great tool, but it's a tool that you really only use in very specific uses. And so my favorite metaphor for this is, it's the corn cob thingies, right? Do you know those corn cob thingies that allow you to hold on to the end of the corn cob and not burn your hands off? And my grandma used to have them. They usually look like little corn thingies, and they work great. And I don't own them. I don't own them. They're awesome. They work. But it's just another tool, and my house is neither super urban nor super rural. We don't have them. And yeah, so there you go. It's a cool tool, but you're not necessarily going to use it all that often. Same with easements. Easement is also a great tool. So in the case of easements, what you're doing is giving limited rights to a third party to do something with the property, usually protect the facade. So historic easements are usually facade easements. And this will protect the property from ever being demolished, ever being damaged. But for this to work, the property needs to be worth a lot of money so that there's motivation for the nonprofit to keep an eye on that easement, right? So it needs to be a really important historic site, and or a really impressive fancy pants property in order to make the work of protecting that easement worthwhile. So it's a great tool. It definitely does what it says it does, but it's really only there for extremely fancy uses. And of course that has limits, not just in how often you can use preservation easements, but also in the perception of the preservation easement, right? So in preservation, we always have to fight against the perception that we are an elitist profession, and it really doesn't help when you're like, well, there's a very important preservation easement on Biltmore. Like, yeah, no kidding, it's super fancy and expensive. That doesn't really help. So the way that I like to think about easements is that they are the caviar spoon of tools. Now, why a caviar spoon? Because if you know anything about caviar spoons, you know that they are always made of seashell, usually abalone shell, because abalone shell does not impart any nasty metal flavors onto your very expensive beluga caviar. I'm not making this up, you guys. You can look it up if you don't believe me. This is the absolute truth. So, these spoons are made up of seashell, right? I'm trying to make it particularly fancy. There we go. So that when you put your very expensive caviar on it, it doesn't impart any nasty flavors. So yes, useful tool by all means. If you're eating caviar regularly, you should have caviar spoons. But the rest of us, yeah, probably not. That's not a super important tool for the rest of us. All right. Next, we've got eminent domain. Now, if you'll remember from 209, eminent domain is not part of police power. Eminent domain is directly comes directly from the Constitution under the 5th and 14th Amendment, which say that you are protected, right? Your liberty and property are protected, except in cases of three things, right? Which you should remember from 209, I hope. Three things. Number one, public use. Number two, due process. Number three, just compensation. If those three things are true, then eminent domain is legal and the government can take your property. But if you'll remember from 209 or from just real life, nobody likes eminent domain. Eminent domain is a threat that you use, and people are very upset by it. And so very often eminent domain is actually threatened, but not used as much as you would think. Not only is it threatened, but sometimes it's threatened to be threatened. So in other words, people who don't want eminent domain to happen will just say, well, the government's going to use eminent domain, which the government has no actual plan to do, just to kind of poison the well. Because once you talk about eminent domain, everybody's going to be pissed off. So if you talk about eminent domain, you're already making it a very adversarial process. So by and large, the government's going to want to avoid using eminent domain if they can. And by and large, if people really don't want something, they might say, oh, the government's going to use eminent domain. That doesn't mean we don't use it. Sometimes you got to use it. But by and large, you want to try to avoid it as long as you possibly can, because once you used it, it's done and you cannot unuse it. In other words, eminent domain is like going nuclear. Once you drop it, once you drop that bomb, that's it. You're not coming back from that. So be aware that if you use eminent domain, that's it. You're not going to get people back from that experience. People are going to be very negative about it every time since. That's how it goes. All right. So that's eminent domain. Next, we've got Section 106 and also NEPA and SEPA. Now, if you'll remember from previous classes, all of Section 106, all that it does is create a process that has to be followed. What it doesn't do, and I want to make this 100% clear in case you haven't been paying attention in class, what it doesn't do is say you need to preserve anything. All right? NEPA and SEPA actually have teeth, but NEPA and SEPA are not directly about preservation. But in the case of Section 106, all Section 106 says is it an undertaking? Yes or no. Does it have a potential impact on historic properties? Yes or no. Is that impact negative? Yes or no. And if all of these things are yes, then all it says is, okay, now you have to do a memorandum of understanding. That's it. What it does not say, and I want to emphasize this one more time, what it does not say is, hey, we are going to stop building here. We're going to save this property. No, that does not do that at all. So what does Section 106 do for us then if it doesn't prevent things from being destroyed, demolished, etc.? Well, what it does is it pauses. It pauses the process. All right? That's what it does. So you might think, well, that's not super useful, but you're wrong. That is super duper useful. And that's what this process allows you to do. So this is really what Section 106 does. It hits the pause button and says, okay, we are going to stop whatever we're doing just for a little while, and that gives you time to do things like change people's minds. I mean, I know that doesn't sound like much, changing people's minds, but yeah, that can be enough. That can be enough to stop a process from happening. That can be enough to get public opinion on your side. And if you get public opinion on your side, that's it. That's all you need in some cases. So this is a very, very useful tool, even though it doesn't really do anything specifically, right? It's not going to change anything necessarily. What it's going to do is allow you the time to say, wait a minute, we want to get people to think about this property or whatever. Same thing with NEPA, same thing with SEPA. Those things allow you to hit the pause button and make a difference. Now, you'll remember from 209 maybe that Section 4F is kind of like Section 106 except with teeth, right? Section 4F, which has to do with transportation only. Section 4F says you have to change your plans unless there is no feasible or prudent alternative. And the way that I think about it is that Section 4F adds the record button, which is the old red button. You probably don't remember any of this, right? This Walkman looks completely foreign to you. But so Section 4F adds that record button to the process. So it says, okay, well, if this thing is a recordable tape, or in our case is related to transportation, then you can make a change. All right. Hopefully this drawing makes at least semi-sense. Does it make a little bit of sense? Hopefully. Well, let's hope so. Next, we've got tax freezes, tax deferments, tax valuations, etc., and also all sorts of loans like revolving funds, community development block grant loans, National Park Service grants, etc. All of these things are very straightforward because all they are is money. They're just a big bag of money. And I mean, there are lots of useful tools out there, but I would say big bag of money, probably maybe the best tool. I don't know. That's a pretty cool tool. I like that. I wish I had more of it. Big bag of money. So these different money solutions all work differently, right? So, for instance, a tax freezes your tax valuation at a certain point, even if you do more work for it, for your property to improve it more. Revolving funds are loans that are usually either low interest or even zero interest loans, which means you have the money now and can pay it back later. There's also just tax breaks, like straight up, you're not going to pay taxes on this for a while. There's all sorts of different ways to do this. Some of them are public, some of them are private, some of them require a match, some of them don't. But fundamentally, they're all just big bag of money, which who doesn't like big bag of money? All right. The last tool that I want to talk about is overlay zoning. Overlay zoning is just like zoning, except it's specialized for preservation. So remember I said that Swiss Army knives are okay, but like meh, they're not my favorites. Yes, they're not, and I don't love them. In part because there's no knife lock on Swiss Army knives. So if you use the knife for anything real, it's very, very dangerous for your fingers. Also, it doesn't. Swiss Army knives, as far as I know, don't have good pliers, and so that's lame too. So I prefer Leatherman. I think they make the better multi-tool. Fundamentally, it's still a multi-tool, right? It's just like zoning. It works just like zoning, except it's a more specialized tool that has more of the stuff that is useful. So for instance, it's got a knife lock so that you don't cut your fingers off when you use it. And it has pliers, which I, again, really like. But fundamentally, it's still just a multi-tool. It's just a multi-tool that's more specifically developed for a particular use. So you just use zoning. That's better than nothing. If you can have overlay zoning, I think so much the better. But again, it's just a question of better formulated tool, but it's fundamentally the same tool. All right, so we've got all these tools, and yeah, they all work differently. They all have very different uses, but I want to emphasize now what brings them together, what makes them work. So Obviously, the first thing that makes them work is that they're all in the Constitution. You need to make sure to obey the Constitution. That's really, really important. If you don't, then it's, against the law, and then it's not going to work super well for you, is it? But in addition to that, to make sure that these tools work within the Constitution, obey the Constitution, and also work well, what you need is a container for them, a toolbox, if you will, that will allow them to remain effective and and usable for years to come. Now, this toolbox is extremely important, and in my little metaphor, think of it this way: if you keep your tools out in the rain all the time and don't protect them, then they're not going to work super well, are they? They're going to be, pretty soon they're going to be garbage. They're going to be all rusted up and not work well at all, and then you're left with a very bad situation, right? So what you really want is a very, very good toolbox. And this toolbox is extremely important, first of all, to make sure that you've got your tools with you, because if you don't have your tools with you, they're not really doing you much good. But second of all, that your tools are protected. And in this case, what they are is protected from people saying, well, no, you can't use eminent domain because it's against the Constitution. In this case, because it's not, let's say, for the public use. Well, how do you prove that it's for the public use? How is it in the public interest? Well, that's what your plan is for. So the plan itself is not really a tool. The plan, the Rational Comprehensive Plan, is the toolbox that holds your tools and makes sure that your tools are in good shape and protected all the time. And you want to make sure that your toolbox is, high quality, toolbox. So as I mentioned, this is usually going to be your Rational Comprehensive Plan. Because every place has a Rational Comprehensive Plan, right? So you want to make sure that your Rational Comprehensive Plan is in good shape so that your tools remain in good shape as well, right? So that when people want to make sure that things are used properly, they need to obey that Rational Comprehensive Plan. Now, that said, some places are going to have a preservation plan. And that preservation plan is going to be separate from the Rational Comprehensive Plan. Again, I've mentioned this in 209, but I'm not a huge fan of separate preservation plans. They used to be the standard. These days, we mostly use plans that are kind of all in one, right? So we might have a separate preservation plan, but we'll also have a preservation section inside the Rational Comprehensive Plan. And I think that's really important because that way preservation is normalized, right? Preservation becomes just another part of planning. And so people are more likely to use it, more likely to do it. It's just like with your tools, or I guess with my tools, I have a regular toolbox, and then I have specialized toolboxes for painting, right, that has sandpaper and paintbrushes and whatever. I have another one that has stuff to deal specifically with wood. So I have like wood filler, epoxy, that kind of stuff. But those toolboxes, they don't come out unless I really, really, really need them for a particular use. Whereas my general toolbox has all the stuff that I use all the time. So I would argue you're better off having everything in the general toolbox as much as possible, because that way you don't like go somewhere and then realize like, oh man, I forgot my epoxy at home and now I can't fix this rotten wood or whatever. All right, so it's the same in this case. All right, I think I'm going to stop there for this particular talk. If you have questions about this, please bring them up at our next conversation. Thanks, everybody.